Why sleeping in medieval inns was worse than you imagine. Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are leaving behind the comfort of modern hotels and stepping into a world where spending a single night away from home could become the most exhausting experience of your life. Imagine that it is the late 14th century. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the hills, and the narrow dirt road beneath your feet has become little more than a dark ribbon winding through endless countryside. You have been walking since dawn. Your boots are soaked with mud, your shoulders ache beneath the weight of your belongings, and every muscle in your body begs for rest. As darkness spreads across the landscape, fear begins to replace fatigue. The forests surrounding the road are filled with stories of highway robbers, wandering mercenaries, hungry wolves, and desperate outlaws. Traveling after sunset is considered a dangerous gamble. Every strange sound in the distance forces you to wonder whether another traveler is approaching, or someone far more dangerous. Finally, just as hope begins to fade, a faint orange glow appears in the distance. An inn. Smoke rises lazily from its chimney while warm light flickers through tiny windows covered with oiled cloth instead of glass. From outside, it seems almost magical, a promise of food, warmth, and safety. You hurry toward the building, believing that your hardest hours are finally over. But in medieval Europe, arriving at the inn was often only the beginning of your troubles. The smell reaches you before the doorway does. It is not the comforting scent of fresh bread or roasting meat. Instead, the air is thick with smoke from an open hearth, damp straw, spilled ale, wet wool, horse manure, sweat, and the unmistakable odor of dozens of people who have gone weeks or even months without a proper bath. The wooden door groans as you push it open. Inside, the room is crowded beyond imagination. Merchants argue loudly over prices. Pilgrims whisper prayers before tomorrow's journey. Soldiers boast about battles that may or may not have happened. Farmers drink cheap ale after long days in the fields. Dogs bark beneath the tables while chickens wander freely across the floor, pecking at scraps left behind by careless guests. Every corner is alive with noise. The crackling fire struggles to heat the smoky room, while candles provide only enough light to reveal tired faces covered in dirt and exhaustion. The innkeeper barely looks at you before asking a simple question. Can you pay? Not who you are, not where you came from, only whether you have enough coins. Because if your money runs out, so does your welcome. You reach into your pouch and place a few silver coins onto the rough wooden counter. The innkeeper quickly sweeps them away before shouting toward the kitchen for another bowl of stew. You have secured a place for the night, or at least that is what you believe. In reality, the word room means something very different in the medieval world. And before this night is over, you will discover that sleep is the one luxury money cannot always buy. The inn was never truly full. It was simply overflowing. You carry your small bundle through the crowded common room, expecting the innkeeper to lead you upstairs to a quiet chamber. Instead, he points toward a narrow staircase and says only 2 words. Find space. At first, you assume he is joking. Surely there must be a private room waiting somewhere above. But as you climb the creaking stairs, reality becomes impossible to ignore. The hallway is packed with travelers. Some are removing muddy boots. Others are already lying on piles of straw wrapped tightly in rough wool blankets. Every inch of floor seems occupied. A small door opens nearby. Inside, what the inn proudly calls a guest room contains far more people than beds. One large wooden frame dominates the room. Instead of a comfortable mattress, it holds a sack stuffed with old straw, flattened by years of use. The straw shifts and crackles beneath every movement, releasing clouds of dust into the air. The innkeeper gestures toward the bed. There. You count the occupants. 1, 3, 5, 8. By the time everyone settles down, more than a dozen strangers are squeezed together on a single bed. Personal space simply does not exist. A wealthy merchant lies beside a poor laborer. A traveling monk rests next to a soldier whose armor still smells of sweat and rust. No one questions the arrangement. This is perfectly normal. If every bed is occupied, late arrivals sleep on benches, tables, or directly on the floor. Some curl up beside the fireplace. Others spend the entire night in the stable with the horses, grateful simply to have a roof over their heads. Privacy is almost unknown. Changing clothes, eating, praying, arguing, and sleeping all happen within sight of complete strangers. Conversations continue long after darkness falls. Someone laughs loudly across the room. Another traveler coughs without stopping. A baby begins crying somewhere downstairs. Near the window, two merchants continue debating the price of wool as though midnight means nothing at all. Just as the room finally begins to quiet, someone starts snoring, not ordinary snoring. A deep, thunderous roar that echoes through the wooden walls like distant cannon fire. Within moments, another joins in, then another. Soon the room becomes an orchestra of snores, coughs, restless turning, and heavy breathing. Sleep feels impossible, and even if you somehow manage to close your eyes, the smallest creatures in the room are only beginning their nightly feast. The tiny creatures, waiting in the dark. As the candles burn lower, the room finally grows quiet. The conversations fade, the laughter disappears. Only the crackling fire and the chorus of snoring remain. You close your eyes, hoping exhaustion will overcome the discomfort. For a few precious moments it almost works. Then, you feel something crawling across your wrist. At first you brush it away without thinking. A minute later another sensation tickles your neck, then your ankle, then your shoulder. You sit upright, confused. In the faint glow of the dying fire, tiny dark shapes move across the blanket. Bedbugs, not just one or two, hundreds of them. The straw mattresses inside medieval inns were almost impossible to clean. They collected years of dust, sweat, animal hair, spilled food, and moisture. Hidden deep inside the straw lived entire colonies of bedbugs, fleas, and other biting insects. The moment the room became still, they emerged. To them, every sleeping traveler was a warm meal. Within minutes, itchy bites covered exposed skin. Some guests scratched constantly throughout the night. Others wrapped themselves tightly in blankets despite the summer heat, hoping to keep the insects away. It rarely worked. The fleas were even worse. Many had arrived on rats, dogs, cats, and even the travelers themselves. They jumped effortlessly from one person to another, spreading through crowded rooms with alarming speed. No one understood germs, no one knew about bacteria. Most people simply accepted the bites as another unavoidable part of travel. The smell inside the room grew heavier as the hours passed. Sweaty clothing hung from wooden pegs, wet boots dried beside the fire. The straw mattress trapped years of odors beneath every sleeper. Fresh air barely entered through the tiny window. Breathing itself became unpleasant. Outside, the wind rattled the wooden shutters. Inside, dozens of strangers shifted, coughed, muttered in their sleep, and scratched endlessly at invisible pests. You glanced toward the doorway, wondering if sleeping outside might actually be better. But beyond those walls lie dark forests, thieves, wild animals, and freezing night air. For most travelers, there was no better choice. The filthy, overcrowded inn remained the safest place available. Yet the night was still far from over. Because before sunrise, another unwelcome visitor would appear, one far larger than a bedbug and far less afraid of humans. The rats that ruled the night hours pass, but true sleep never arrives. Every time your eyes begin to close, another itch forces you awake. The straw beneath your body shifts with every movement from the strangers beside you, making it impossible to forget that you are sharing a bed with people whose names you do not even know. The fire downstairs has nearly burned out. Only a faint orange glow creeps through the cracks in the floorboards, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind whistles against the wooden walls. Inside, the air feels thick, warm, and strangely heavy. Then, you hear it. A soft scratching sound. At first it is so quiet that you wonder if you imagined it. Perhaps it is only the old timbers settling after a long day. But the sound comes again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It moves beneath the floor. Someone nearby opens one eye but says nothing. They have heard the noise before. You sit perfectly still, listening. The scratching grows louder. Tiny claws race across the wooden beams beneath the room. Something bumps against a loose board, followed by the faint squeak of an animal searching for food. Rats, not one, several, perhaps dozens. Medieval inns almost always stored grain, bread, cheese, dried meat, and ale. Horses were fed nearby, and scraps of food collected beneath tables every single day. Wherever food gathered, rats soon followed. The innkeeper fought them constantly, but victory was impossible. Every crack in the walls became a doorway. Every pile of straw became a hiding place. As darkness covered the countryside, the rats emerged with remarkable confidence. One suddenly darts across the room. A woman gasps as the animal disappears beneath another bed. A merchant lifts his feet instinctively while an old pilgrim simply sighs and pulls his blanket tighter. No one screams. No one runs. For these travelers, rats have become another ordinary part of the night. The animals search for crumbs dropped during supper. They chew leather bags, nibble pieces of bread left beside sleeping guests, and sometimes climb directly onto the beds in search of anything edible. You grip your belongings a little tighter. Losing your food would make tomorrow's journey far more difficult. Losing your money could leave you stranded hundreds of miles from home. So even in exhaustion, many travelers sleep with one hand wrapped around their purse or tucked beneath their clothing, afraid that hungry rats, or even hungrier thieves, might steal everything before sunrise. And while the rats are frightening enough, the greatest danger inside many medieval inns does not have four legs. It walks on two. The strangers you could not trust. The night grows deeper. The candles have almost disappeared, leaving only darkness and the weak glow from the dying fireplace downstairs. Most travelers are asleep now, or at least they appear to be. In a medieval inn, closing your eyes did not always mean you were safe. A crowded sleeping room was a perfect opportunity for thieves. Everyone carried something valuable. A merchant might have silver coins hidden inside a leather pouch. A pilgrim might carry food for the journey ahead. A soldier might own a better knife or a small amount of money saved from previous battles. And after a long day of travel, exhaustion made people vulnerable. Some travelers slept with their valuables tied around their waist. Others placed their bags beneath their heads as pillows. A few even kept a hand on their weapons throughout the night. Trust was rare. The person sleeping beside you could be another honest traveler searching for a safe place to rest, or they could be waiting for everyone to fall asleep. This uncertainty created a strange atmosphere inside medieval inns. People shared the same beds, the same food, and the same fire, but they did not always share trust. A sudden movement wakes you. Across the room, a shadow rises from the straw mattress. For a moment, you wonder if it is another traveler searching for water. But the figure moves quietly, too quietly. They step between sleeping bodies and reach toward a merchant's bag. Before anything happens, the merchant suddenly grabs the person's wrist. A loud argument fills the room. Everyone wakes. Accusations fly. The innkeeper rushes upstairs, angry that his peaceful night has been disturbed. But without guards, without proper investigation, and without clear evidence, the truth is difficult to discover. Eventually, the room becomes quiet again. The stranger returns to their place. The merchant hides his belongings more carefully, and everyone tries to sleep. But now nobody feels completely comfortable. The medieval inn was supposed to be a place of safety, yet it was also a place where travelers from every corner of society were forced together, rich and poor, honest and dishonest, healthy and sick, friend and stranger. There was no choosing your neighbors, no locking your own private door, no calling the front desk for help. You simply endured the night and hoped morning would arrive quickly, because when the first light of dawn finally entered through the small window, you would leave this place behind, but the memories of sleeping in a medieval inn would remain with you forever. Pringing on the medieval inn. The first rays of sunlight slowly enter through the tiny window. For a moment you are confused. You do not know where you are. Then the memories return, The crowded room, the endless noise, the insects, the strange smells, the uncomfortable bed shared with complete strangers. You survived the night. Around you, the inn begins to wake. There is no peaceful silence like a modern hotel morning. Instead, the room quickly becomes alive again. Travelers cough and stretch after hours of restless sleep. Some complain about aching backs from the hard wooden surfaces beneath the thin straw mattresses. Others search through their bags, checking whether their belongings are still there. The smell of smoke and old straw fills the room once again. Downstairs, the innkeeper is already preparing breakfast. But breakfast in a medieval inn is not what modern travelers would expect. There are no fresh cups of coffee, no clean plates waiting on a polished table, and no quiet dining area. Instead, guests receive simple food meant to provide energy for another difficult day of travel. Perhaps a piece of dark bread, a bowl of thick porridge, some cheese, maybe a small amount of meat if they can afford it. The food is basic, but after a miserable night, even a simple meal feels like a reward. You walk downstairs among the other travelers. Some look refreshed, most do not. Everyone carries the same tired expression, the look of people who have rested but never truly slept. At the entrance, horses are being prepared. Merchants load their goods, pilgrims adjust their bags, soldiers check their weapons. The road is waiting again. Before leaving, you look back at the inn. From the outside, it appears peaceful. Smoke rises from the chimney. The wooden walls glow under the morning sunlight. A stranger passing by might imagine it as a warm and welcoming shelter, but you now know the truth. Behind those walls were crowded rooms, sleepless nights, unwanted visitors, and countless stories from travelers who had no other choice. For people living in the medieval world, an inn was not a place of comfort. It was simply a place to survive until morning, and for many travelers, surviving the night was the greatest luxury they could afford. The hidden dangers beyond the bed. Leaving the inn behind feels like a relief. The fresh morning air touches your face, and for the first time in hours you can breathe without the heavy smell of smoke, sweat, and damp straw. The road stretches ahead, but as you continue your journey you begin to understand something important. The terrible night inside the inn was only one part of medieval travel. The journey itself carried dangers that most modern people can hardly imagine. A traveler in the Middle Ages did not simply book a room and follow a safe highway. There were no smooth roads, no streetlights, no emergency services, no maps guiding every turn. A wrong path could lead you miles away from civilization. A broken wheel could leave a merchant stranded. An injury could turn a simple journey into a fight for survival. This is why medieval inns were so important. They were not comfortable, they were not clean, they were not private, but they were necessary. Every evening, exhausted travelers searched the horizon for the familiar signs of an inn, the rising smoke, the wooden building, and the faint sound of people gathered inside. Even knowing what waited for them, they still entered, because a terrible bed was better than sleeping beneath the open sky. A crowded room was better than facing the darkness alone, and a noisy inn was better than the dangers waiting outside. As you walk farther down the road, you pass other travelers heading toward the same destination. A merchant with a heavy cart, a group of pilgrims carrying simple belongings, a farmer bringing goods to a nearby market. Each person has their own reason for traveling. Each person carries their own worries, and each one knows that when night comes again, they may have to search for another medieval inn, another crowded room, another uncomfortable bed, another night hoping that morning arrives quickly. Because in the medieval world, travel was not an adventure, it was a challenge, and sometimes simply finding a place to close your eyes was the hardest part of the journey. As evening settled over the countryside, the inn became even more crowded. New travelers arrived one after another, merchants with heavy packs, weary pilgrims, wandering minstrels, and farmers leading tired horses. There was no check-in desk, no private reservation, and certainly no guarantee of a bed. If you arrived late, you simply accepted whatever space remained. Sometimes that meant sleeping on the cold wooden floor. Other times it meant sharing a straw mattress with complete strangers. The common room echoed with loud conversations, laughter, arguments, and the constant clatter of wooden mugs. Smoke from the fireplace mixed with the smell of sweat, wet wool, horse leather, and cooked onions, creating an atmosphere that modern visitors would find almost unbearable. As darkness fell, candles provided only a faint glow. Shadows danced across the timber walls while every creak of the old building sounded like someone approaching. Travelers kept one hand on their purse or knife, knowing that theft was far from uncommon. No one truly slept in peace. Every strange sound could mean danger, or simply another exhausted traveler searching for a place to lie down, and this was only the beginning of a very long night. When it was finally time to sleep, the real nightmare began. Privacy simply did not exist in a medieval inn. A single room could hold 10, 20, or even 30 strangers. Men, women, children, and travelers from distant lands often slept side by side, separated only by chance. The beds were stuffed with old straw that was rarely replaced. Over time, the straw became damp, dirty, and infested with fleas, lice, and bedbugs. Throughout the night, tiny insects crawled through blankets and clothing, leaving painful bites that travelers would remember for days. Snoring filled the room like rolling thunder. Some people talked in their sleep. Others coughed endlessly from illness or years of breathing smoky air. Babies cried while restless dogs wandered between sleeping bodies, searching for scraps of food. The smell was impossible to escape. Sweat, damp clothes, muddy boots, and unwashed bodies blended into the stale air. Opening a window offered little relief, especially during the freezing winter months. For many travelers, getting a full night's sleep was not just difficult, it was almost impossible. And before dawn arrived, even greater dangers were waiting in the darkness. As the night grew deeper, fear often replaced exhaustion. Many travelers stayed awake, not because they wanted to, but because they feared what might happen while they slept. A purse left unattended could disappear before morning. A merchant carrying valuable goods might wake to find everything gone. In some inns, thieves rented beds just like ordinary guests. They waited patiently until the room became quiet before silently moving through the darkness. The dim candlelight made it almost impossible to recognize anyone. Fights could also break out without warning. Too much ale, long journeys, and short tempers often led to arguments that quickly turned violent. A peaceful evening could become a dangerous one in only a few moments. Outside, wolves sometimes howled in the distance, while strong winds rattled the wooden walls. Inside, every creak of the floorboards sounded like approaching footsteps, making even the bravest travelers uneasy. For people living in the Middle Ages, surviving the journey was only half the challenge. Surviving a single night at the inn could be just as difficult. But the worst problem wasn't the thieves, the noise, or even the fear. It was something far smaller and far more dangerous. The greatest danger inside a medieval inn was often invisible. Long before people understood bacteria or germs, sickness spread easily from one traveler to another. Dozens of strangers ate together, drank from shared cups, and slept only a few feet apart. If one person carried an illness, everyone around them could be at risk. The straw mattresses were rarely cleaned. Blankets were used night after night without being washed. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrived in the warm bedding, making every night's rest uncomfortable and sometimes dangerous. Fresh water was not always available. Travelers often relied on ale or weak beer because it was considered safer than questionable water sources. Food could also spoil quickly, especially during the warmer months, leading to stomach illnesses that turned a simple journey into a life-threatening ordeal. Even a small cut or insect bite could become infected. Without modern medicine or antibiotics, minor injuries sometimes became deadly within days. To a modern visitor, these conditions would seem unimaginable. Yet for countless medieval travelers, this was simply the price of finding shelter for one night. And before sunrise, there was one final challenge that every guest had to face. Before the first light of dawn reached the horizon, the inn was already awake. Roosters crowed in the distance as stable hands hurried to feed the horses. Travelers gathered their belongings quickly, knowing that every hour of daylight was precious. There was little time for comfort and even less time for rest. A simple breakfast, usually coarse bread, thin porridge, or a small piece of cheese, was enough to begin another exhausting day on the road. Clean drinking water remained scarce, so many continued their journey with a mug of weak ale instead. The common room, so crowded only hours before, slowly emptied. Merchants loaded wagons, pilgrims adjusted their cloaks, and wandering travelers stepped back onto muddy roads stretching toward distant towns and castles. For most of them, the sleepless night they had just endured was not unusual. It was simply another chapter in the reality of medieval travel. The next inn along the road would likely be no cleaner, no quieter, and no safer than the last. Looking back from the modern world, it is easy to understand why spending a single night in a medieval inn could feel like surviving an adventure. And this is only one small part of what everyday life in the Middle Ages was truly like. But the discomfort of medieval inns was only a reflection of a much larger reality. For most people in the Middle Ages, daily life was filled with hardships that modern society can barely imagine. Cleanliness was difficult to maintain, travel was slow and dangerous, and even the simplest comforts we enjoy today did not exist. A long journey could last weeks or even months. Roads were rough, often little more than muddy tracks carved through forests and open fields. Heavy rain could turn them into rivers of thick mud, while winter snow made many routes nearly impossible to cross. Travelers faced more than exhaustion. They had to worry about robbers hiding along isolated roads, wild animals roaming the countryside, and bridges that were too old or damaged to cross safely. Every trip demanded careful planning. Food had to last for days. Horses needed rest and water. Wagons broke down without warning, forcing travelers to repair them with whatever tools they carried. As the sun disappeared behind the hills each evening, everyone searched desperately for shelter before darkness covered the road. Because after sunset, the dangers of medieval travel became even greater, and sometimes the road itself was far safer than the place where travelers finally stopped to sleep. Finding an inn before nightfall was never guaranteed. In many parts of medieval Europe, inns were separated by long stretches of lonely road. If travelers failed to reach one before darkness, they often had no choice but to sleep outdoors, exposed to the cold, rain, and whatever dangers lurked nearby. A campfire offered warmth, but it also announced their location to anyone passing through the night. Bandits watched busy trade routes, searching for merchants carrying coins, cloth, spices, or other valuable goods. A single attack could leave an entire group with nothing. Weather was another relentless enemy. Sudden storms soaked clothing, ruined supplies, and turned dirt roads into deep fields of mud. Horses struggled to pull heavy wagons, while exhausted travelers slipped and fell with every step. Even crossing a river could become a life-or-death challenge. Bridges were often narrow, damaged, or completely washed away. Strong currents could overturn carts, sweep away animals, and destroy precious cargo in a matter of moments. Every mile demanded patience, endurance, and a little luck. For medieval travelers, reaching an inn did not mean the journey was over. It simply meant surviving one danger before facing the next. And the people waiting inside those inns could sometimes be even more unpredictable than the road itself. Inside every medieval inn, strangers from every corner of the world gathered under one roof. A wealthy merchant might sit beside a poor farmer. Pilgrims returning from sacred shrines shared meals with soldiers, wandering scholars, craftsmen, sailors, and entertainers. Each traveler carried different stories, different languages, and different secrets. As the fire crackled in the hearth, conversations filled the room. News traveled by word of mouth, and inns became important places where people learned about wars, royal decrees, distant kingdoms, and changing trade routes. Not every story was true. Rumors spread quickly, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Tales of dragons, haunted forests, mysterious disappearances, and cursed castles entertained exhausted travelers long into the night. In a world without newspapers or the internet, These stories shaped how people understood the unknown. Some visitors listened with fascination, others remained silent, carefully watching everyone around them. Trust was earned slowly because no one could be certain who was honest and who was hiding dangerous intentions. A friendly smile could belong to a kind traveler. As the fire burned lower and the conversations faded, another side of medieval life slowly emerged. The darkness outside was more than an absence of light, it was a source of fear. Without street lamps or electric lights, the countryside became almost completely black. Dense forests, abandoned ruins, and empty roads disappeared into the night. People of the Middle Ages lived in a world filled with superstition. Many believed that spirits wandered after sunset, witches gathered in secret, and strange creatures waited beyond the edge of the firelight. Every unexplained sound seemed to confirm these fears. The howl of a wolf echoed through the hills. An owl's call drifted from the trees. The wind rattled old shutters and made loose wooden beams groan like distant voices. To modern ears, these were ordinary sounds of nature, but to a weary traveler, exhausted after days on the road, they could feel like warnings from something unseen. Fear itself became a powerful companion. It kept people awake, sharpened their senses, and sometimes caused them to mistake ordinary shadows for deadly threats. When the sun finally rose, many travelers felt relief, not because they had rested, but because they had simply survived another night. And yet, despite all these dangers, millions of people continued to travel across medieval Europe, driven by faith, trade, duty, and hope. Despite every hardship, medieval inns played an essential role in keeping the world connected. Without them, merchants could not carry goods across kingdoms. Pilgrims would struggle to reach sacred destinations. Royal messengers might fail to deliver urgent news, and entire trade routes could collapse. These humble inns became meeting places where cultures, languages, and ideas crossed paths. A traveler from England could exchange stories with a merchant from Italy. A monk might copy a valuable manuscript while resting for the night. Skilled craftsmen shared techniques, and explorers carried knowledge from one region to another. Yet every visit came with uncertainty. No traveler knew what awaited behind the inn's heavy wooden door. It might offer warmth, a hot meal, and friendly company, or it might bring disease, theft, sleepless nights, and unexpected danger. That uncertainty defined medieval travel. Looking back today, it is remarkable how ordinary people endured such conditions with courage and determination. They accepted risks that most modern travelers would never consider. The next time you check into a clean, comfortable hotel with soft beds, hot water, and secure locks, remember those who spent the night in a medieval inn. Compared with their experience, even the simplest hotel room today feels like a palace. So, just how terrible was it to sleep in a medieval inn? The answer is simple: far worse than most of us can imagine. A single night could mean sharing a filthy bed with strangers, enduring endless noise, fighting off fleas and lice, guarding your belongings from thieves, and hoping that illness would not follow you on the road the next morning. And yet, for millions of people throughout the Middle Ages, this was completely normal. They traveled without modern medicine, without electricity, without comfortable beds, and without the safety that we often take for granted today. Every journey demanded courage, patience, and endurance. The next time you complain about a noisy hotel room, a delayed check-in, or an uncomfortable mattress, remember the travelers who crossed medieval Europe. Compared to their experience, even the most ordinary stay today would have seemed like unimaginable luxury. History is filled with stories like these, stories that reveal how ordinary people survived extraordinary hardships. If you enjoyed this journey into the darker side of medieval life, be sure to subscribe and join us for more forgotten stories from history. Until next time, sleep well, because tonight at least you're probably not spending the night in a medieval inn.